Hello everybody, I am George from Ireland and this is a video about Kanzuk. Anyway, I'm part of my trademark dishevelment. Yes, you can see my wardrobe behind me. Some people have commented on that, said, oh, you should shut it all. Well, why? This is me, this is the way I live, unspun. Anyhow, so what is Kanzuk? Because it's something which is being mooted more in recent days. That it stands for Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom. It's an acronym. It's the idea that these countries should enter into some kind of federation. Now, it's not a new proposition. It's been around in some form since the latter part of the 19th century. So it goes back to the zenith of the British Empire, and some people in the what was then the global hegemon said that the United Kingdom and the Dominions ought to form some sort of federation, maybe have a joint parliament, something like that. But so what's common to these four countries? Well, partly they're all English-speaking countries, not just countries where English is one of the official languages, but a country in each case where the great majority of people speak English as their mother tongue. Now, and this is relevant to some people where most people are white, right? Now, some people say, well, that's ridiculous, that's got nothing to do with it, why should you care about colour? And I agree, actually, but for some people that matters. And we can look at India, which has obviously got English as an official language. One of 18 official languages is at the central government level, but where rather few people speak English as their primary language. But yes, there's a considerable minority of Indians, perhaps 30%, speak fluent English, more speak it to some extent. You might think it's everybody, but it's not, because if you're a non-Indian, the sort of Indians you've met are much more likely to speak excellent English than average, because you're overlooking people who live in rural areas, lower income people, less educated people, very elderly people, who are very unlikely to speak English well, if at all. But another thing about these four countries is they're all highly developed countries, so they're all affluent. So they were dominions of the British Empire. Well, the UK wasn't a dominion, it was the heart of the empire, and so they could be internally self-governing. But for a while, Canada, Australia, New Zealand were reliant upon the United Kingdom for foreign affairs and defence. From the 1920s, the Statute of London, I think at the Ottawa Conference, it was agreed that the Commonwealth as such would be born, and that these countries could even run their own foreign policy, be represented in the League of Nations after the Second World War, set up their own embassies abroad, no longer represented by the British Embassy. And obviously the UK in the 60s took the decision that it should try to enter the European Economic Community, and eventually succeeded in 1973. Now, Canada had more or less put its marker down over Suez in 1956. That was the Franco-British-Israeli attack upon Egypt. The French and British, irked by Egypt seizing what was their property, the Suez Canal. The Israelis had other beef with their Egyptian neighbours. But Canada voted against the United Kingdom on this issue, the first time that Ottawa had broken with London. Of course, Canada was independent. They're absolutely entitled to pursue that policy. And so they'd made clear which side their bread was buttered on. But maybe it was not being pro or anti-British, just thinking the UK was wrong on that particular action, that policy. Australia and New Zealand still took the UK side in that one. But the idea of sort of Commonwealth solidarity broke down. The British Empire was transitioning into the Commonwealth at the time, as independence was granted to more and more countries, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Burma, Ghana, and then Ghana's 1957, by then it's just about everywhere. So Suez was a seminal moment, you might even say a world historical moment, when London accepted that the writing was on the wall for imperialism, and the new Prime Minister, Macmillan, came in and said, well, we're going to ask these colonies, do you want independence? And if you do, and they did, it should be granted in short order, and that's it, and just simply dissolve the empire. He said, why do we want to own tracts of territory? Let's just go back to where we were a couple of centuries ago and just be rich without ruling lots of land. You say that, I mean, okay, the UK was rich in a way, but most people were still in dire poverty. Some people were rich. He thought it wasn't worth having colonies. But anyway, so the UK said, well, it's a European country, it's not really an oceanic power anymore. That was the future. I say this thing about Kanzuk, but of course, until 1900, Australia was a geographic expression, and it wasn't a polity. It only became a political entity in 1900 with federation, where up until that point, Australia comprised several colonies, each in a direct relationship with the United Kingdom, but not with each other. New South Wales, Tasmania, Western Australia, Queensland, and so on. They were all separate colonies. There was no Australian Parliament, no Australian Prime Minister. 1900, Australia was united as a political unit. Yes, separate states, but there was an Australian Parliament, an Australian Prime Minister, and so forth, setting up its own army and navy. So the states had a margin of appreciation to do things a bit differently, but there was one federal government to do things on a federal level, and that was that, set up a capital city. It was Melbourne provisionally until Canberra was completed some decades later. And there was even talk in the 1970s of New Zealand becoming a state of Australia, but in fact that didn't come to pass. In the First World War, there's a war cabinet in London, very small, as in the cabinet's up to 25 people, but the war cabinet is like, say, the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary, or Minister for War, as I would have said in those days, the Foreign Secretary, a couple of others, not the Chancellor of Exchequer, because the idea is once a decision's been made to fight, you're not going to let money hold you back. We're not going to say, that weapon system is a bit expensive, we'll let more of our people get killed in order to save money. No, parsimony mustn't enter into it. Now, is it a bit unrealistic? Because you've got to see whether you have the economic wherewithal to prosecute the war, perhaps. But the various Commonwealth Prime Ministers of the countries I mentioned, if they were in London, they attended those war cabinet meetings. I've read the minutes of some of them. Jan Christian Smuts of South Africa, he was at some of them. So South Africa was sort of considered for this, but in South Africa, most people didn't speak English. A lot of them spoke Afrikaans, many spoke Bantu languages, indigenous people, and most of them were not white. The majority of people were black, a few people were Indian. 30% of South Africans were white at the peak, and that's the mid-20th century. But after the Second World War, Five Eyes came out. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States all sharing intelligence. These Anglophone countries. And it's something which still prevails, but people have gone a bit cool on it because Donald Trump is there, who's known to blurt secret intelligence out, telling the Russians about things he's heard from the Israelis and stuff like that. And then in a press conference with the Israeli Prime Minister saying, I never said it was Israel, effectively confirming that he had said it was Israel sometime earlier, that it was the source of some intelligence about some sort of laptop bomb on a plane. Anyway, so I said after Suez, this had serious repercussions. In the 1960s, it was his name, Mingus. So Robert Mingus, the Prime Minister of Australia, said it was British to his bootstraps, and he retired as Prime Minister then. Previously, British Prime Ministers always go to Balmoral, the Queen's private residence in Scotland, where she spends July and August. And Mingus, believing as an Australian he was a British Prime Minister, decided he would go to Balmoral. So Mingus was replaced by a new Prime Minister, Howard Holt, and Holt quipped that he was Australian to his British bootstraps, pointedly saying he wasn't British. Mingus had said that Britain's shores didn't end at Land's End, they continued to Australia. And in the late 60s, when Holt changed the pound sterling, which Australia used, to the Australian dollar. Holt's the guy who vanished into thin air, taking a walk on the beach and then never seen again, not hide a hair of him. Did he take a swim and just drown or get eaten by a shark? Most likely explanation. Was he kidnapped by a Chinese submarine? Nobody knows. Anyway, the great occultation of Holt has never ended. But as I said, 1973, the UK joined the European Economic Community, which subsequently metamorphosed into the European Union, and the UK has now just left it. I remember about 20 years ago, some Conservative MPs, some Eurosceptics in the United Kingdom, moved to the idea of joining NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Association, turning it the North Atlantic Free Trade Association, as some sort of viable alternative to the European Union. But that wasn't going anywhere. So the countries in this Kanzuk idea, as I say, they share a common tongue. They have sort of Westminster-style democracy, common law. They're all capitalist countries. Okay, almost everyone's capitalist. Even Cuba's a little bit capitalist. So sometimes they've got a common heritage. But now that the UK's left the EU and people are thinking what's going to happen about trade with the EU, is this internal market bill, is this really going to get through? Is it going to be thwarted by the United States? And indeed the EU saying, well, you won't have any good trade with us if you do that. Is it going to cause ructions in Ireland? So I'm actually against the internal market bill, but that's really because it's against international law. But I'll go into that in another video. The Kanzuk idea, I think it's not a bad idea to begin with. Is it workable really to have a federation? that seems not very feasible to me. There could be some sort of cooperation, and I don't think it should be limited to those. And I think race should have nothing to do with it. I think these countries, it's because they're all the same sort of economic level, that does make it viable. You don't want one who's seriously poorer than the other. There's an idea that there will also be free movement of labour, goods, services, and capital, a bit like the European Union. But now people say, yes, but it's ridiculous because the United Kingdom is not geographically contiguous with the others, whereas look, it's adjacent to other EU countries. Well, the UK being an erstwhile EU country. But the idea is that we've had the death of distance, the passing of remoteness. Geography doesn't matter as it once did. You could be in New Zealand in 20 hours by plane. There are direct flights from the United Kingdom to Australia, not stopping to refuel now. And ultra long range aircraft are coming in. We've got solar power planes. Distance can matter less and less, and we've got the internet. I mean, if the UK could govern Australia in the 18th century, certainly the distance doesn't matter now. Nobody's saying the UK should rule Australia or Australia should rule the UK, but just that distance didn't have to matter that much centuries ago, and it certainly doesn't need to matter now. So geographical location is actually less important than ever. But I would let in other countries, but the Bahamas, for instance, other former Commonwealth countries, because they got a similar level of economic development. And most Bahamians are black. That doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if everyone was black. I don't care what colour people are in, colour people are. So perhaps some sort of white nationalist saying, oh yeah, colours matters, but that's ludicrous, distasteful, and that touches on racism. So there could be other highly developed countries that could come in. I think South Africa is probably not wealthy enough. And would there be completely free movement of people? Maybe, because they're all very rich countries, not huge numbers of people want to go this way or that way, and might be roughly similar numbers going in each direction. One of the problems of the European Union is, look at Romania and the UK. There must have been 100 Romanians coming to the United Kingdom for every one who moved in the other direction, and I was one of those who moved in the other direction. So virtually every Westerner I met in Romania was there because of his or indeed her personal life, an intimate liaison with a Romanian national. So there could be more countries. I don't know which other Commonwealth ones, or Caribbean ones could be suitable, or they could be in Africa, Asia, Latin America. It doesn't matter. But none immediately spring to mind. Would they be interested in joining? I'm not so sure. The Bahamians might say no, thank you. We're close to the United States. We're part of CARICOM. So would there be completely free movement? Possibly. Some people are mooting it. But doesn't this rather defeat the point of Brexit, as in to limit immigration? You're just going to allow more? Yeah, maybe it does, actually. And wouldn't it undermine the very idea of independence if there had to be some sort of common legislature for these? It would have to be some rather loose federation, coordinating on foreign policy, having the very same foreign policy. I don't know. The European Union still doesn't really manage to have the same foreign policy, despite the Treaty of Lisbon saying there's a common foreign policy. There's an external relations commissioner. The EU's got representative office abroad. Let's call them embassies. It's got a European army in all but names. Had it for like 20 years. European Rapid Reaction Force. And we have to support the European foreign policy in a spirit of loyalty and solidarity, according to Lisbon. I'm an Irish citizen, so that's what we did. Almost nobody in the Irish Republic was in favour of the bombing of Libya 9 years ago, but we had to be, officially our government was, because of the European Union. Good thing, bad thing, take your pick. But like it or not, that was Irish policy too. Anyway, we've got to ask ourselves, is this practical in the modern day and age, this Kanzuk idea? Because, yes, Canada is an Anglophone country, but rather few Canadian people have got British ancestry. In Australia, something like 40%, New Zealand a bit higher. So maybe it's just not going to happen. Those of non-British stock don't have much reason to identify with the UK. Even those of British ancestry, I think, don't particularly identify with the UK. Look at Australia. First fleeters, they're descended from those who arrived in January 1788. They said that was almost 250 years ago. We really don't care. I'm Australian, not British. But, I mean, like the other ways, British people, do they say that they're Australian or Canadian? Usually not. But, okay, they've almost never got ancestors from those countries. And many people in Australia say we're an Asia-Pacific country. Our relationship with China matters more, trade relationship. Although, yes, I think some Australians are seeing that actually China wants to bully them. You can't say this in universities. And the Chinese are trying to spy on them through Hawaii and things like that. There's a significant Chinese-Australian minority. Okay, probably some of them are completely loyal to Australia, but others might feel some sort of conflict of loyalties. Whatever the passport says, they're going to advance the interests of the great dragon and get back at the round eyes. So there was talk in the past couple of years of joint embassies, Australia, New Zealand, and Australia, Canada, and the UK, or the Canadians have got an embassy somewhere and the UK doesn't, then the Canadians will help out the British people and vice versa. It might be impractical. I think there's probably not enough commonality. I don't know how the trade deal would work completely. Free movement of goods and services, maybe. Mutual recognition of standards, possibly. It was tricky to work out with the European Union. Is it retrograde? Possibly. Is it based on some sort of imperial fantasy? Well, I think imperial is not the word, because it's not like the UK trying to control anywhere else. It's just like cooperation. So, I mean, it's an alluring idea. I wonder if it's been outdated. And as I say, I have doubts about its feasibility. But that's what Kanzuk is. I don't think it's been clearly articulated. There's been some sort of constructive ambiguity in the Kanzuk notion. Some people said it must be like this. And without saying, well, it definitely has to have free movement between everybody. And we definitely have to have, say, mutual recognition of qualifications. Andrew Roberts, who's an ardent Brexiteer, likes to see himself as a Tory sage, a bit of an establishment toady. He published an article on this not long ago. It's been panned by various Europhiles. So some Remainers have obscured the whole idea and think it's just risible and really backward-looking and ideologically unsound. Will it get off the ground? There seems to be little appetite for it. The UK government's not really pushing it, so that might not happen. I don't believe it's going to happen. I'm open to it. I would like to hear more particulars. Is it practical? That's what I doubt, actually. There doesn't seem to be a great head of steam of enthusiasm behind the idea. Anyway, that's my penny's worth about what Kanzuk is. So I really need the donations to keep this channel going. So please donate with the greatest possible liberality on PayPal. You can find me there, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Callahan spelled Callagan. So book me for online lessons in history, politics, religious studies, French, geography, English language, English literature, English as a foreign language, and so on. I give advice on schools and universities in the UK, tour guide in Londinium. I translate from French, Spanish, Italian, German, Russian, Romanian, and help edit documents, help people with coursework, do interview practice, and so forth. Toodaloo.